Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 7th of November 2018, a little bit after 1 o'clock. We had a few technical problems there, but we're delighted to be with our audience today. Your hosts are Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. We're also joined by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives and Alex Thompson, speaking from the Netherlands with Eastern Approaches. We're going to go straight on to what we think is the most important issue in UK at the moment, which is the rise of EU military unification. Mike?
Yes, we're going to start off with Emmanuel Macron. So, well, he had some things to say on this subject. He said, we have to protect ourselves with regard to China, Russia, and even the United States. When I saw President Trump announcing that he's quitting a major disarmament treaty, which was formed after the 1980s Euro missile crisis that hit Europe, he went on to say, we will not protect the Europeans unless we decide to have a true European army. Let's see what he said next. It'll come up in 1 second. We need a Europe which defends itself better alone without just depending on the United States. So that was Macron's position. David, so he says we need a European army, but as we pointed out not so long ago, the UK, amongst others, already operating with EU badges on their sleeves. Well, even Emmanuel Macron insisting on using the term EU army rather than European military.
Yeah, it's disingenuous again, isn't it? We've got this cover code language to try and keep everybody from really understanding and evaluating what this actually is. So he's late to the party, he's using the wrong terms of reference, and it's just way off the mark. So yes, this is already happening. You know, we've pumped this stuff out about what's going on with EU Navy, EU NAVFOR, and how that really is the one to watch. This is really all defence services. It's not an EU army. It's completely disingenuous for anybody to be using that term of reference. This is single point command and control of all defence services in the EU zone. So this is Navy, Air Force, Paras, Marines, SAS, as far as we're concerned in Britain, Special Forces, all of it. So to call it an EU army, again, is really throwing everyone's off the ball, but it does give us the opportunity to put the issue back on the table, because he's thankfully for us, he's raising the media wind. So
yep. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. Well, look, at the weekend, we hosted a meeting in Totnes, an emergency briefing on defence and security. Following that meeting and following discussions with you, David, we pushed out a little video clip, let's have a look at that. So we pushed out that video, and in the video said that Nigel Farage had basically made a comment about the question from the floor about an EU military unification, that the EU would be in control of our military next year. Now, it turns out, actually, having looked at that once again, we were wrong about that. It wasn't Nigel Farage. Now, I looked very closely at the video, and I couldn't see initially David Davis's lips moving. We'll see what happens later on. But in fact, that was David Davis said that. But nonetheless, the tweet went out and the video went out. It went out on Facebook as well. And there has been a reaction. So first of all, we had Nigel Farage coming on to LBC. And this is what he had to say.
I said it for years. They're going to build a European army. They all laughed at me. Clegg said it was a dangerous fantasy, but hey, it's out there. Juncker's been hinting, and today, President Macron has made it clear that they must build a true European army to counter threats that include the United States of America, and in so doing, willfully, in my view, trying to hold NATO below the waterline. But it's okay, Brexiteers, because our Prime Minister tells us that Brexit means Brexit. So presumably, we are not a part of this. We are in for a shock.
So that was Nigel Farage speaking on his LBC programme. And David, Nigel Farage has been saying it for years, apparently.
Well, it's really interesting because when I wanted to talk to him about it to him face to face, and I said the magic words EU military union, he ran off. And now this is where it gets interesting, of course, is because this is exactly what happened when I spoke to David Davis face to face out the back of the Red Line across from Downing Street. You know, chit chat. We need to talk to you about EU military union, really. This is the big one. It's what we've got to get to grips with. He was more interested in keeping David Cameron in place because he was doing all the work for us. But on mentioning EU military union, Mr. Davis went very red and run off, which is exactly what Mr. Farage did. So I've got to take issue with Nigel here on this, and David Davis. They both need a heavy pounding, a public ridicule for what's happening here. We've all got to hold them to account in any way, shape or form we can. Get on the phone to them, tweet, email, whatever, write, because they are not building anything. They are unifying ours. They're not building anything. This is completely incorrect of Nigel to say this. It's way off the mark. They are unifying our military into single point command and control under EU.
Right. So David, sorry, David, just let me interrupt you there, because this is a really important point, because many people that are, shall we call them, fans of Nigel Farage say that Nigel Farage has been speaking about this for years. I received an email from somebody saying, well, maybe he's a bit late to the party, but at least he's talking about it. Lots of people very positive about Nigel Farage. The key point is, by couching this in language like EU army, he's actually undermining the actual situation. Yes,
absolutely, totally agree. He's undermining the gravitas of what's happening here substantially. Now, I don't know why he's doing that. Maybe it's ignorance or something. I've no idea. But nonetheless, by deed or effect, he is doing it along with all the others. So the threat is EU military union, not anything else, just that. So throwing other stuff in the hat is wrong, but for him to use the phrase EU army, it's going to take the British electorate's eye so far off the ball, they won't know whether they're going to be drilled, punched or bored when this thing arrives. Because it's our military, not the EU's, that's at question. So when he's talking about Brexit means Brexit and so on with Theresa May, let's be under no misapprehensions here. This is the only thing that's been agreed. It's the only thing the EU wants. What are the politicians doing about it? Nothing. They're not using the right terms. They're pretty much silent on it because, as far as I see, Brexit is military union is Brexit. Full stop.
Absolutely. Now, let's just come back to what's happened since the weekend and since the event and the tweet. Leave Means Leave have now pushed out a little video clip all about the, what they're describing as the EU army. So again, they're not using the right language. But David, this is a step forward, is it? Or is it?
It's a tentative, what can we say about it? It's a tentative attempt. The phrasing isn't right. It's a bit woolly. And it doesn't really, anybody watching this won't really understand that this concerns them directly and our military and our nation and our future industry, our future development and anything that we may wish to generate, and the command and control aspects of it, and that it's going to end up with everybody having their children and grandchildren conscripted into it, and they will be paying tax. So this is where they're way off, because they're not talking about military unification, they're not talking about defence union, and they're not talking about all the big stuff. They're having a go at Nick Clegg and so on and so forth. You know, that's gone. We're way beyond that. You know, the general public knows all about that. And, you know, look, you know, they need to do better. They need to sit round a table. If they're genuine about this, they need to sit round a table with either David Banks or ourselves and Brian and you there, Mike, and really do this job properly if they want votes for Brexit and to actually leave the EU. Because as it stands, we're not leaving the EU because our military is remaining.
Yeah. Well, let's just briefly look at David Davis, and you know, frankly, we've zoomed in here, and you can see that he is just about moving his lips in sync with the words. So it is him. It turns out that was my mistake, and I apologise for that. But now the point here is, David, that David Davis therefore understands this situation, and he's not speaking out about this at all. So where do we go from here? How do we get these guys to engage on this thing?
He clearly knows what this is, because the reaction I got from him face to face told me what I needed to know. And this footage here of him under his breath saying that demonstrates that he does know what this is, because he knows full well that our military will be taken over by the EU next year, because these are his own words. So he knows exactly what this is. And he knew what Justin was saying and the gravitas of it. And yet he doesn't really approach the subject at all. Now, how are you a nation without control of your own military? It's the first rule of our government: taxation with representation, and then we have we're in a situation where we can defend ourselves. But that isn't the case under military union, because the military that we have as Great Britain will be consumed into the EU under their command and control, and that includes Trident, doesn't it, Mr. Davis?
The question that was in my mind then, I'm interested in your thoughts and your thoughts, David, is if I put out a message or a video where I've made a mistake and Nigel Farage is being accused of something, when in fact it was David Davis, why was there no pushback? Why was there no comeback on that? Any thoughts?
Well, absolutely. I think what's happened, of course, is that Nigel Farage didn't come back with a proper pushback, because the blame would have gone on David Davis. Then we know that key members of the government fully aware of EU military unification. So what have they done? They've used Farage for what he does best. He goes on LBC radio. He doesn't talk about the key issue, which is EU military unification. He starts talking about an EU army. And then he ends it off by saying, well, actually, these people have got me a little bit worried. There is no full analysis, there's no urgency, there's no informing the British people of how dire the situation is. This is classic Nigel Farage, leading people into a cul-de-sac. We know about this, don't worry, Nigel Farage, I've got it all under control. What does he do? Nothing. So Nigel Farage, in my opinion, is protecting David Davis, because we've nearly got the lid off over this. All of the key Conservative Brexiteers, all of the key Conservative MPs, their Cabinet Office, they know what's happening, but they daren't let it come out in the public domain. And what Leave Mean Leave has done is produced an amazingly childish cartoon video, which also perpetuates the lie they are forming an EU army. No, they're not. They are just about to finish the formation of the unified EU military structure, and that means we have lost control over all of our military and all of our military infrastructure. This is massive media control. And I think we've got to give ourselves credit that we have brought this out into the open. Nigel Farage has done nothing. Gerard Batten has said nothing. David Davis has said nothing. Leave Means Leave has said nothing. And all credit to Justin Walker from the Chartist movement, British Constitution Group, who got there to that Leave Means Leave meeting, asked the question, and they went into a big flurry. Strangely enough, if you go on Leave Means Leave website, the Bolton meeting where Justin asked that question is the only one where the video is not posted. That's not an accident. Perhaps we should bring Alex in.
Actually, David has one more comment, please. Yeah.
No, this is very important. I've just had a message from what I'm going to call a top inside Tory source. And this is direct. I think this is directly aimed at the people that we're referring to. So I'm going to read you this message that's just come in whilst we've been speaking. Minister's initial approval of EU defence across all those EU Council agreements breached a parliamentary instrument called the Security Reserve Resolution, November 1998. That resolution relating to issues of defence and treaty changes states that ministers must wait until the full security process is completed in Parliament before any decision for or against is taken at EU councils. Ministers broke parliamentary codes to put UK unwittingly into EU defence. Now, this is crucial because of the man that sent me this. Absolutely crucial.
Alex, should we bring Alex into this
Indeed,
point?
yeah.
Alex, what are your thoughts on what we've discussed so far?
Well, I shall start, Mike, with the very important message that David has just read out, because the key word there is reserve. Parliaments, and particularly our parliament, the mother of pearl parliaments, use this word reserve to mean that which the representatives of the people insist on deciding about themselves. Now, even people in Britain are unclear sometimes about the relationship of parliament to government to the crown. And for example, they assume that the Defence Committee or other committees in Parliament are Her Majesty's government. They're not. They're the people with immunity and privilege. So what's happened here is a reserve has been broken by the ministers of the crown. That is by the crown. Ultimately, I'm sad to say, that is by Her Majesty, who's breached her coronation oath here. So I'm sorry to say that we have a 1642 situation on our hands here. We have the makings of civil war, because the crown has declared war in a certain sense on Parliament, which is the people. We have the same setup as the pre-revolutionary, pre-Civil War constellation of the late 1630s. And to complete the picture, of course, and we discussed this extensively in both David's talk and mine on Saturday, we are arriving at a pre-1776 situation of taxation without representation, because the British people and even the British Crown are not represented in EU military unification, yet we are going to be taxed for it. So we have all the makings, God forbid, of an absolute uprising here. And some of the quotations I found on and for my talk on Saturday, I shall just read one out, are shocking. Here is a man, Lord Campbell of Alloway, who was in the British Expeditionary Force, which is the British Army making its way into France in 1939, who was captured during the Dunkirk retreat and spent the final 5 years of the war holed up in Colditz Castle. You wouldn't expect it of a man like Lord Campbell of Alloway, but in 1986, on the 8th of October, according to Hansard, he stood up in the House and said, "My lords, to what avail is it to talk in emotive terms about our allegiance to the Queen? To what avail is it in this context to drum up the emotions? There was the partial surrender of sovereignty by the will of the people of this country in 1972. We owe, of course, a primary allegiance to the Queen, but we also owe some allegiance to the surrender of sovereignty that we, that's Her Majesty's government, accepted in order to make the system of Europe work." So at Lords and Commons level, we have Her Majesty's government, the Crown, making war against the people and our common law constitution, and thereby breaking the Queen's oath. Now we see what this surrender of sovereignty means. It means that parliamentary reserve, parliamentary scrutiny, and even the much vaunted inaccurate claim of sovereignty of Parliament in England at least, is being ridden roughshod over by Her Majesty's government itself.
Alex, you're almost speaking about constitutional issues there, but you know, Theresa May's government keeps telling us that we don't have one.
This is what we're often told, isn't it? And yet constitutional issues have obviously reached Brexit, because very quietly in the last 48 hours, the Attorney General, who is the chief legal officer of the government, at least for England and Wales, has been brought into the subcommittee of the Cabinet dealing with the Brexit negotiations. It's ostensibly because he needs to advise Her Majesty's government that there's no difference really between two forms of customs union participation and the Northern Irish backstop idea. But I wonder whether something more fundamental is going on, because constitutional issues, now that we have a Ministry of Justice and a fake Supreme Court, whose real powers are actually vested by the Crown in the Cabinet Office and the Civil Service now, despite that, we seem to have constitutional issues at the point where they become contentious still vested in the Attorney General, who is a political officer. That's where legal issues are sent to die. And when the public write, or even Parliament writes to the Attorney General, they're told, "Bog off, we're here for the government, not for you." So I think you can see that everything is falling back to the Queen's coronation oath at this point.
You know, this reorganisation of government, people being put into positions, this is something that we're watching very closely, because some interesting people being put in interesting positions, particularly in the Cabinet Office and around that sort of infrastructure.
Powerful corporate people.
Yes. Now, bring David back at this point. David, you wanted to highlight Bernard Jenkin here. He put this out yesterday. Another reason we might be leaving the EU. We're constantly told that the threat of an EU army is a myth. So he's pushing this out, but is he taking it seriously?
I don't think he's taking this seriously at all. This is just a sort of, he's. I know. Does he believe this mantra within the Tory party that there are no votes in defence? Because it just doesn't have the weight and gravitas. The language is so woolly that anybody looking this and think that really, well, there's not a problem. It's just something they're doing. It's nothing to do with us. It's a myth. Maybe that's the closing thing that he wants you to go away with. But of course, it isn't a myth, and it's deadly serious. So I've got to say, where you was talking about people being reshuffled, Angus Lapsley, who's one of the head honchos there in the civil service, has just been moved. Now, he was with Boris Johnson, where a lot of this stuff was agreed in the EU machinery to do with EU military union. He's now just been moved from FCO into the MOD, and he's heading up a section there of joint, this lovely word again, joint, British, European and American defence. So this is a crucial move, because this is one of the guys that's been basically doing this as a job, as it were. So where we go on to the Bernard Jenkins thing, he's just, come on, we need to get onto this. You've got another slide, haven't you, Mike?
I've got Bernard Jenkins' contact details, and of course these are freely available on the Parliament website, but we've got a telephone number there, 0207 219 4029, and an email address, bernard.jenkins.mp@parliament.uk. And I think, David, you want to encourage people to start contacting people like Bernard Jenkins directly and starting to put some pressure on.
Yeah, what I want you to do, your phones are not going to dial themselves. Pick up the phone, grab that number, pick up the phone and dial. Get onto him. Talk to somebody in the office. If they don't answer, leave a message. Ring back. Get your friends to do it. If they don't answer the phone, send him an email. If they don't do anything with that, fax him. If he doesn't do anything with that, tweet him. We need to make a concerted effort here, all right? And this is one of the guys. Let's just have a real good go with Bernard Jenkins and see if we can get him to actually do something useful.
Yep. Okay. Now, Alex, at the weekend, one of the points that was made was that, of course, this EU military structure, which is being established and built up, has potential for us ending up with a European military force on the streets of Britain, for example, in a civilian role, a civilian policing role. We've seen in the past 12 months the British government impose Operation Temper, which is where we've seen British military personnel replacing the police in certain roles. The government says in order to free up police to fulfill other duties. But if the British military is rolled into, or when the British military is rolled into this European military force, there is the potential that we don't just see British troops on British streets. And I think you wanted to highlight the issue of the continental system and particularly the sort of gendarmerie type policing that we have over there.
Yes, gendarmerie sounds a fancy continental word, and if people are experienced as tourists in France or Italy, with the Carabinieri being the Italian one, they have a slightly romantic notion of nice chaps who keep you safe in busy and terrorist-hit cities with their carbines. But here is a clip which will start rolling now of the German riot police. I believe this is the Federal Riot Police, and I don't know whether this is so-called left or right-wing violence. There's actually a lot more left-wing violence in Germany, but that's perpetrated mainly by the favoured sons of the political class, and so it's ignored. This is probably more a so-called populist demonstration, but look at the tactics used here. I'll be very technical here, this is no longer a German riot police by this stage, because like about 16 other countries, I may have got the number slightly high, but several European Union member states and INICOR has formed EUGEND4, the European Gendarmerie Force. Now look at the middle of the back of the column here. A second squadron of police bursts out. This is obviously German drilling, not every nation can do this, but these chaps are now free to go around any state within the EU that signed up to EUGEND4. And of course, ultimately, this will be part of the acquis, the joint acquisition of EU member states if the European Military Union has its capstone put on it. This is the way in which people standing up and not even rioting, I think in this case, just a couple bounce an object maybe off a policeman, which is reprehensible, but generally they're standing there with flags and banners. This is the way that they're going to be pushed back in future. And you might think, oh, that's the continent, but there are actually links between the membership of these inner structures, the gendarmerie and the justice. There's the charge again. There's links between the countries that are members of that and those that are actually with the Anglo-Saxon Intelligence Alliance, which is the world's all-seeing eye, which I outlined on Saturday. And I say that particularly because I'm speaking here from the Netherlands, where within a couple of months of each other in this spring, the Netherlands, through Prime Minister Mark Rutte, made it be known that they wished to join the Five Eyes Alliance, which until now is only English-speaking common law democracies. And at the same time, or within 2 months of that, the Dutch said, actually, we want to join the European prosecutors set up. After all, the new Eurojust idea. And here's a second clip showing more of the same. Wing Chun, which is a variation of Kung Fu martial arts. There's a chap from Turkey called Mr. Avcı, who actually trains the Spezial Einsatzkommando, SEK, the German police in these techniques, which are on screen at the moment, these martial arts techniques. I must stress, this is not the German Army Special Forces. That's the Grenzschutzgruppe 9. This is the German Police Special Forces. The most comparable thing in Britain would be the tactical support groups that certainly Greater Manchester Police have got, which you've seen in action with the very heavy-handed assistance, well, actually running the bailiff operations on behalf of the bailiffs, despite it being a civil issue. So this is the German version of tactical policing, right, with Wing Chun. Obviously, you can see these are police special forces with padding done up to the nines because they're practicing pummeling each other, which is what Wing Chun is all about. Actually, it takes the passive force of someone running at you and channels it back on them. So this is actually quite routine to see the German police punch someone's head in on the streets here. It's a kind of policing we've never had. And why am I talking about policing? Well, because in 1642 with the English Civil War, in 1776 with the American Revolutionary War, in both cases, the Crown broke its coronation oath. Well, there wasn't one in 1642, but there was by 1776. And in both cases, these were British citizens, first in Britain, then in the colonies, against whom the Crown raised an army. And if you put a gendarmerie out on the street to riot, to do riot control in this style, you are actually making war on the people in just the same way as if the men have actually got the uniforms of soldiers on.
And just to remind everybody, in October 2015 at the European Defence Agency conference, Federica Mogherini and Jens Stoltenberg, who of course is the Secretary General of NATO, were taking part in that conference and discussing this very subject, the issue of merging the military with the civilian police for policing functions. So this is not something that we're making up. This is something that has been discussed at the European Defence Agency conference and is an ongoing discussion.
It is, and European Union inner core member states actually discuss things and pre-cook them before they ever get to forums like the Council of the European Union or even the European Commission, which is effectively the civil service for the EU. These things are going to be done bilaterally and multilaterally by heads of government and their civil services talking to each other. And what you'll see is that more and more member states accede to the inner core arrangements of justice, policing and whatnot. So yes, this is very live.
Okay, well look, just to finish this section off, just want to remind everybody where to go to get the information on the UK column website about this. If you have a look on the front page, on the right hand column there's a box which takes you to the EU military unification page, as we just scroll through this, you'll see the amount of information that there is there. Do go and have a look at this timeline if you haven't seen it already. Share it as widely as possible. Have a look at the articles underneath. There are more to come. The videos from the weekend's event should be available hopefully by the weekend. But lots of information on there. Really, David, just a couple of final words, but really enough information there that everybody should have everything they need in order to engage their MPs and others.
Yes, that's completely correct. The trick here is to pick up the phrase. We're talking about EU military unification, military union, defence union. Use that phrase when you approach your MP in any way, shape or form you can. A lot of people were coming up to us at the end of the defence conference saying, what can we do? Well, obviously what we've now got to do is challenge the MPs, use public ridicule if you have to in order to get them to move their position, which is a position of silence at the moment, a position of ignorance. So we haven't got time to mess around with these people anymore. They need to understand this, and they need to be made to understand quickly, because it's the only instrument readily available to the people in order to deal with this. So whilst that it will affect obviously the aristocracy and the barons and so on from top down, which was something that we discussed, and I know approaches have been made in this way before, but it hasn't worked. But it needs to be collective, because this will affect everyone, you know, from Lord Dartmouth down to the bin men and the nurses and the HCAs and everyone in our society. This is going to affect everyone. So get out there, pick up your phones, start dialing, do something. You've got to get in these people's faces and challenge them in any way you can. Now, don't wait, right? It isn't going to wait for us. They're going to carry on regardless with this, and they're probably going to accelerate. So we need to up our game, and we need to up our game quickly, collectively.
Brian, I think that's going to be one of the subjects of your talk at Democracy in Chains on December the 2nd.
It definitely is, Mike, and it comes down to who they is. This is the question that comes out of a lot of the mouths of a lot of people. Well, who are they? How can we identify them? To which I say, look at what they say and do. But the other thing I want to say is that when you do pick up the phone to challenge these people, far from it being some big confident member of parliament, what you end up talking to is somebody who is terrified of the fact you've called them personally to challenge them. So the more people make these calls, send these emails, the more they will see that these people are utter cowards, which is why they are conducting treason behind closed doors. They're scared of us.
So just to confirm, Democracy in Chains taking place at the Crown Plaza Hotel in London on Sunday the 2nd of December 2018. Details available at alternativeview.co.uk. And just a reminder again, spotlight on HPV vaccines taking place this Sunday, the 11th at the Tabernacle, Notting Hill. And a reminder that Facebook has taken the event down from Christina England's Facebook page, so it can't be shared on Facebook from her original event advertisement. So please, even if you can't get to this, please share the details around. Where do we go from here, Brian?
Well, another advert, which is for medical fascism. This will be at the Lugger Inn, which is Penzance, Cornwall, tonight at 7:30 this evening. And this is another event put on by Rob Ryder. He's going to be talking about living in a society where parents no longer have any rights over the treatments and health practices for children. We can have an opinion, but in the end it's only the so-called experts' opinion that counts, and they will use the full force of government agencies to force their opinion on parents if they believe it's for the benefit of the child. So Rob Ryder absolutely hitting the nail on the head there. This is fascism, but it's being applied to how we receive so-called healthcare. So if you're in the Cornwall area, Devon area, you can be down in Penzance tonight for 7:30. Please do go and support that event.
Well, another week and another Henry Jackson Society report. This time, Putin sees and hears it all, how Russia's intelligence agencies menace the UK. So what are they saying here? Russia's intelligence agencies and security services are as much as 52 times the size of their British equivalents. They're saying there are up to 5 times the number of Russian case officers in the UK as there were in 2010. These 200 case officers are handling up to 500 agents. They're saying out of an estimated population of 150,000 Russian expats living in London, up to half are said to be FSB, GRU or SVR informants, potentially some 75,000 assets. They go on to say as many as half of the Russian embassy diplomats are actively engaged in intelligence work, with as many, if not more, said to be working in Russia's trade delegation. And the UK's warnings index, relied upon by border control to flag persons of interest, including spies, has proved fatally ineffective at preventing Russian officers from freely entering the country in order to execute hostile operations. So I wanted to bring Alex Thompson in to ask what you think of those points that are highlighted in the Henry Jackson Society report here.
Risible, Mike. Particularly, I think the one about the size of Russian intelligence compared with Britain or compared with how Russia was a few years ago. Nobody likes to talk about Israel, do they? I mean, the Israeli Signals Intelligence Agency, Shmone Matayim, Unit 8200, has actually the smallest signals intelligence staff and the most inexperienced, because they're all conscripts aged 21 or under, of any of the world's major intelligence. Israeli signals intelligence is second to none. So the number of officers is actually pretty immaterial. As regards the five-fold increase of GRU and FSB case officers in London and Edinburgh, that's the Russian diplomatic presence in Britain. Well, one tolerates, as MI5, as many Russian or indeed Chinese or Israeli case officers in Britain as one has British spies in those countries acting under diplomatic or related cover. Otherwise, you have mass expulsions. People will remember that this happened in the Reagan and Thatcher era particularly. So does this not rather suggest that we have recently whacked up the number of MI6 in Russia to about fivefold, or perhaps those operating under thin cover like the British Council? That's what it sounds like to me. If there's any substance at all in that idea of suddenly 200 Russian spies in London, then we're only tolerating that if we have that many in Russia. And what are they up to? And finally, the idea that 75,000 Russian expats in London and the home counties are informing to the SVR, and that's the most ridiculous claim of the lot. Has anyone actually spoken to any of the Russians who live in London? Most of them tried to get away from Putin for one reason or another, or came mostly to have a stabler or more Western-style education for their children. And the idea that they're all rushing to speak to Moscow about what they're encountering on the golf courses of Surrey is a bit beyond me.
Well, we've got to build a big demon to fight, Brian, don't we? But I just wanted to highlight a little bit about Henry Jackson Society, and maybe this gives us a clue to what you've just said, Alex, because here's Dr. Alan Mendoza, the Executive Director. Dr. Alan Mendoza is a founder and Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. He directs analysis, research, focus, strategy and development for the organization. But that doesn't end there, because what else is he? Well, he is in the Conservative Party. He's Conservative Councillors Association. He's Conservative Party Foreign Policy Forum, the Disraelian Union, Conservative Friends of Israel, and Atlantic Council of the UK. So, what is going on here? And the other thing that I noticed, Alex, is that if you look at the trustees for the Henry Jackson Society, in amongst that lot is Michael Gove and Gisela Stewart, both sitting MPs. And my question then, Alex and Brian, actually, is, how that must be seen as a massive conflict of interest.
Well, I think it's more than a conflict of interest, because these people are driving somebody else's political agenda. It's not just that they have another interest which conflicts with their primary parliamentary interest. They are actually active in these other organisations to implement a policy which is very often hostile to their own country. I don't know whether you want any further comment from Alex, but I'll shortly move on to RUSI, where we can see exactly the same thing happening.
Yeah, just a couple of seconds, Alex.
I first spoke to Alan Mendoza when he was plain Mr. Alan Mendoza as a Cambridge undergrad in '97, and last spoke to him by phone in 2015 or so. And in fact, on the latter occasion, I was offering my help in all innocence to him to translate Russian material. He said, I'll be glad to get back to you, but sadly never did. Perhaps he found I was with UK Column by that point. But without being undiplomatic, I'll say I remember Alan Mendoza really from being my Cambridge roommate's drinking buddy. And I also remember him from the Disraelian Dining Society, where his contribution seemed to be limited to standing up before the speaker got going and said, "Gentlemen may now smoke." Now, that's the kind of environment he comes from. CUCA, the Cambridge Union Conservative Association, which is the hothouse for budding Tory politicians, along with the equivalent in Oxford. So I'll say I don't regard him as cynical. I think I regard him as misled. And I think he's earnest in wanting to protect the nation. So many of these people are that come from the public schools, Oxbridge and whatnot. But I don't think they're being led by the nose by the right people.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, let's come on to the subject of RUSI. We'll do this one very quickly because we've got RUSI, which David Ellis prefers to call UC and put the EU at the front, is launching another paper. This was a couple of days ago, but looking at security in Northern Europe, deterrence, defence and dialogue. And my question is, when you drill into this, who are these people? Here's their white paper, and of course, look at what it says. It says the latest Whitehall paper, edited by John Andreas Olsen, explores the challenges to the security of Northern Europe in the face of Russia's military build-up. So the military build-up is just put there on paper as if it's come out of nowhere. Of course, there's no background to all of the incitement that the West and NATO has done against the Russians, and now we produce briefing papers for Parliament. And it gets more fascinating. I couldn't resist the decision to go to war, how the British public misunderstand its legal basis. We're all stupid, of course. Who's written this? Dr. Joel Rogers Duval. Now, he's part of Cambridge YouGov. He's an academic pollster. He's also a military reservist, so he's a captain in the army. He's done a little bit of reserve military stuff, but now he's producing paperwork which is going back in to brief the British government. And I smell a rat. Who are these people? They're not transparent. They're not accountable to the public, but behind closed doors, they're helping to form very dangerous policy, in my opinion, as we can see by that label that the Russians are building up.
So, look, I think we should leave it there for today, and we've got a couple of other items that we want to do. Maybe do those on Friday.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just say that we will be moving on to the subject of the BBC. Some amazing information that was sent to me this morning, which coupled together very nicely. The BBC, of course, claiming that it's impartial, it's transparent and everything else. But we suddenly find some very interesting links through to the BBC and what's happening in children's services. So we'll try and cover those on Friday for you.
David Ellis, have you got any closing remarks?
Yeah, I have. Pick up your phones. The phones won't dial themselves. Get on the phone to your MP. Get on the phone to his constituency office. Press them as hard as you possibly can. This concerns you and your family directly. The MPs have clearly lost the plot, totally, because the silence is deafening. The reality and the facts are plain in our faces, and they are choosing to ignore it. Well, we're going to have to make them pay notice, and it's not going to be easy. I'm not promising anything, within the next few days, but the sustained pressure will pay off. Ladies and gentlemen, it will be no good ringing each other when this has happened and you are being taxed and they are conscripting your children and grandchildren. The time to act is now.
Okay, David, thanks very much for that. I'll end by saying thank you very much to all the people who attended our emergency defence and security briefing in Totnes. I think we had about 80 people in the room, so that hall nearly full. Absolutely excellent. And they were also very generous. So not only did people pay to come in, many of them donated, and some individuals gave us very generous donations. So thank you very much for those donations. But I'm also going to say very nicely, very gently, we need the thousands of people who view UK Column to watch every news episode. They're on free subscriptions. You're not yet contributing to what we do. We're warning things are going to get a lot more serious. We need to up our capability. We need those subscriptions and donations from our long-standing supporters. So see what you can do. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.